Chapter 10. Starhawk had proved so thoroughly inadequate as a husband during the short while he and Bluebird lived together that there was no reason to suppose he might have measured up any better as a father, and that he could have brought to Waterlily the honors that came to her through her kindly stepfather, Rainbow. He had arranged the hunka for her when she was a child. Then when she was 15 years old, he sponsored for her rear buffalo ceremony, which marked her turning point from childhood to adolescence. For both he bore much of the cost, which came high, but it ensured Waterlily lasting prestige, such as only the beloved child enjoyed. It was only natural, therefore, as she grew more thoughtful and observant, she grew more appreciative of him, and it was something of a personal triumph for her when Rainbow was bidden to the Kit Fox Society. The bid came as a complete surprise. On a beautiful autumn morning, the herald, as usual, went around the camp circle proclaiming the news, just released from the council teepee in the center. And as usual, everyone strained to catch his words as he came nearer. When he rode past Black Eagle's group of teepees, the words were plain, though their meaning was at first obscure. He was saying, "I am few. 4 of me have gone south to death, and I am few. And so on this day I invite you, Great Eagle, and you, Swift Hawk, and you, Resting Wind, and you, Rainbow, to meet me face to face." The old and time-honored Kit Fox Society was speaking. The herald was its mouthpiece. In such formal and cryptic language had the Kit Fox bidden new members since time immemorial. Of course, the entire camp circle buzzed with the news, for this was one of the truly great and rare occasions. There would be generous feasts given by the relatives of the initiates, and there would be much to see. The Kit Foxes would first mourn ceremonially for their deceased members, and then elaborately welcome the new ones chosen to replace them. With spectacular pageantry, they would stage their unique dance, which always drew crowds of onlookers. They would wear the distinctive Kit Fox attire and the one-sided haircut peculiar to them. It would be an exciting affair, and everyone, big and little, began at once to plan on it, wishing to look well in gala dress because of the many visitors that would surely be on hand. The actual time and place of choosing new members was always private, though of course it was expected. Eventually, after a member or members had died, the ones bidden were as surprised as everyone else, quite understandably pleased by the very high compliment. For it was in fact that membership in the proud Kit Fox might in no way be bought or sought. A warrior was bidden who had achieved his 4 feathers in designating 4 major war deeds, or a man of peace was bidden who was industrious and had some outstanding skill. In addition, every candidate must have a record of consistent hospitality and generosity, which were the qualities that marked a good citizen of the camp circle. For Rainbow it was a signal honor, he being the youngest of the 4. The other 3 had long been prominent and articulate in tribal affairs, while he had always been content to remain quiet in the background. It was a surprise not that those 3 had been chosen now, but that they had been bypassed so long. Of Rainbow, people said, "To be sure, an excellent choice. He is just the type, quick, agile, ready to serve whenever necessary, as Kit Fox must be." That is true, and though he never has much to say, he concerns himself in tribal activities. Look at the feast he has given, honoring his daughter, who is not his real daughter, a good man. Enough could not be said of him. He had general approval and the good wishes of all. No small thing it was to be bidden to the Kit Fox. The bold heralding of the candidates' names without first warning or sounding them out was the haughty Kit Fox way of daring them to refuse the invitation. Should one do so, it would only mean he was unsure of himself or of his worthiness, or that the Kit Fox had made a mistake. But the Kit Fox did not make false choices. It picked its members wisely and could boast that no bid it made was ever turned down. This fact, this record, gave it enormous prestige, comparable to that of the other 5 ancient societies in the tribe. Spurious societies sprang up from time to time, flourished for a while, and then died out. Only those six had always been, their origin, their intuition, lost in mythology. The Executive Chiefs Society and the Adversary Owl Headdress were composed of elderly, venerable worthies, for did much sitting and deliberating. The remaining four, known as Badgers, Stouthearts, Crowkeepers, and Kit Foxes, were military orders, ever alert for action. It was not demanded of them or of any man to go to war unless he wanted to go. The military orders functioned rather as messengers, scouts, camp police, in short as guardians of the camp circle and its people. They patrolled and regulated the communal hunt, and in every way carried out the orders of the magistrates and council. These four societies went on duty by turns. When, for instance, it was the Kit Fox's turn, the members must be ready for any assignment and any emergency. The rest of the time they were loosely organized social club and met occasionally for dancing and feasting, free to pursue their individual interests otherwise. But winter was upon them now, and the preparations could not be made hurriedly for the induction. They must wait until spring, when the people would be in the camp circle again. This gave the families of the candidates ample time to get ready to give feasts and generous gifts at the giveaway that inevitably would follow. The relatives in Black Eagle's camp bestirred themselves to make a credible showing in honor of Rainbow, for although he was an outsider tied to them only through marriage, he was all well liked because he was a good relative to all. Through the constant visiting that always went on, the news had been carried far and wide, and many came from other camp circles to join in the festivities when they took place in mid-spring. Among those visitors was one who came from High Eagle's people, far to the east and south. The man brought a message for Rainbow that entailed a journey for him immediately. It was fortunate for him that the Kit Foxes had only recently gone off duty. He could go and return before it would be necessary for him to function in his new capacity. The bearer of the message came to his teepee upon his invitation, and Bluebird immediately set food before him. After he had eaten and the two men had smoked a pipe together, he said, "I come from afar to bring my nephew's message. He was very ill all winter, but is now well, and this is what he said. When I lay at death's door, I thought of my friend and longed for his companionship again. Tell him, if he can, to come to me for a few days' visit. I cannot go to him at this time." "I will go at once, if my friend wants me," Rainbow replied. "Uncle, when you return, I will accompany you." The man went away. "I suppose that is the man you call Pawnee," Bluebird said. Pawnee was someone definitely placed in her mind from Rainbow's telling about him, but she had never met him. "Who else?" Rainbow asked. "For him alone would I make a journey at this time. Get ready now and get the children ready. We shall start very soon." Bluebird did not question his decision because she knew what fellowship meant. Okola was someone special. His wishes and needs could not be ignored, for that was the basis of the relationship. Everyone knew that. Bluebird knew the story of Rainbow and Pawnee's meeting. During those restless years following the death of Little Chief's mother, Rainbow sojourned in distant places. There he and Pawnee met and took an instant liking to each other, and before parting they entered into what was known as a fellowhood, a solemn friendship pact that must endure forever. Fellows were men of comparable standing and ability who were drawn together by like taste and by mutual respect and admiration for each other's character and personal charm. "The best I have is for my fellow," was their code from the time they pledged eternal loyalty. In line with that, one's best horse automatically went to the other whenever they met after a prolonged separation. When possible, they met on the warpath together in order to protect each other. In every phase of life, they must act without thought of self, in defense of and to the advantage of the other. One must give one's life to save the other. Fellowhood was a compelling association whose obligations were a pleasure. Two men who became fellows, Kola, immediately thereby placed themselves in the limelight, fully cognizant that others watched them, as if saying, "Well, so they think themselves worthy of so high a calling, do they? We shall see how they will measure up." For men of doubtful stature It became cola without counting the cost, soon petered out and became the butt of many jokes and the derision of men. It was no wonder that instances of fellowhood were not common, since such thought was needed before taking the step. The demands on fellows were somewhat greater than those on natural brothers, loyal and devoted as brothers were supposed to be, and automatically like brothers. Each fellow was a son to the other's parents and father to his children. All other relatives were likewise shared. Each was brother-in-law to the other's wife, but with this difference, whereas an informality marked by joking and taking one another in an offhand manner was ordinarily permitted between brother and sister-in-law, men in fellowhood must respect and venerate the other's wife like a sister. They planned to travel together. For both safety and sociability, the uncle, his wife, their son, and Rainbow and his family and his mother, Gloku, making up the party. Perryflower, whom Waterlily had insisted on inviting, was also going. Her mother, Dreamwoman, quickly packed her things, including a fancy gown for dress-up, and she was ready. Leaping Fawn was a dutiful cousin to Waterlily, but being older by a few years, she was used to friends her own age. Besides, so Waterlily told her mother one day, there was something stiff and formal about Leaping Fawn that kept her a little distant. Not that she scares you, but it is not easy to have fun with her, as with Prairie Flower. The two girls going on the journey were excited over the prospect. They had never been far from the camp circle before. It was a leisurely trip. To spare the horses now that Pawnee was well again, there was no need of hurrying there. They stopped each day near some stream or pond and made camp in daylight. The men who were ever on guard rode out from the party from time to time to see that no enemy war party was about in the stretches of deserted country they must cross, and incidentally, they were able to shoot a deer or other animal and supply fresh meat for the cooks when they made camp. For Rainbow and his family, the evenings around the campfire, where all the cooking was done and all the travelers sat together to eat, were especially exciting. Both the uncle and his wife had much to tell that was novel and fascinating about the place they were going. One evening the uncle turned to Rainbow and said, "Well, you visited High Eagle's people the time you and Pawnee made your pact. Was the camp circle on the open prairie, perhaps? Well, you will find it is now permanently located on the bottomland near the Royal Water, the Missouri. It is near good water, and there is plenty of firewood from the willow copse and the cottonwood trees along the bank. But that is not the only reason. Truth is that they want to be near the stockade where the Long Knife soldiers stay." Everyone in Rainbow's party was agog, wishing to hear more about the American soldiers, their appearance, their possessions, their habits, and their families. Up there in their home territory in the northwestern part of Dakota country, the white man was still a rarity, so the uncle was happy to talk and impress his audience. "Listen to this," he said. "Every single day, their big holy iron booms out the most deafening blast at sunset. You cannot imagine the sound. Wait till you hear it. People out hunting far off claim they can hear it. I promise you it will hurt your ears until you think your hearing is killed. But you will get used to it in time." That was his description of a cannon salute. But that was only the start. He told also about rolling wood, by which he meant wagons. The wheels in his operating principle was especially difficult to explain, and the man ended by saying, "Wait and you shall see for yourselves." He said rolling wood carriers were hitched to mules and horses, and that people sat in the carriers to be hauled about. Well, it was understandable that such a queer people would use their own queer vehicles. But when the uncle said that some of the Dakotas themselves, whose daughters lived within the stockade as wives of the soldiers, also rode about in them, that was too much. Bluebird turned to the man's wife with an aside. "I am sure no one could ever coax me into one of those rolling wood things. Have you ridden in one? Yeah, I would die before I could step back onto solid ground." The woman was talking next, telling of woven goods that lay in thick bolts on the trader shelves, and all sorts of bright colors and designs and figures. To this Bluebird said, "And you mean that people go in and buy pieces, any length and any color as they want?" It was unbelievable. She would have to be shown. Back home, she told the woman in quiet tones so as not to disturb the conversation on the men's side of the fire. We see once in a while a shirt or a gown of that stuff when visitors come for celebrations, and I've actually owned a piece of red goods, but they remain a curiosity. To think that I'm going to see them in plenty and actually buy what I want of them, I'm really eager to get there now. The two girls whispered into each other's ear. What kind will you buy? Some red stuff? I want a bright red gown to take home. That was Waterlily. And you? I like a gown the color of the sky. That was Prairie Flower. To young girls used only to clothing of skin, here was something they could hardly wait for. But the woman was talking again to Bluebird. The trader's stores are always full of everything. There are knives and kettles and things made of maza, metal. And also there are bowls and cups of stuff like mussel shell. The things she had to tell. Was there any end to the unheard of items? The wonder of it all. As if the travelers were going straight into another world, which of course they were. Rainbow was speaking. What kind of people are the Long Knives, really? The only one I've ever saw at close range I did not like. It was at Tupac's winter camp up north where I was staying. He showed up one day hungry and ragged. He turned to Bluebird. I have told you of this before. Then back to his companion. The man was all hair, and his eyes were the color of clear ice, blue and cold. His hair was yellow as a sunflower on his head, and over the lower half of his face. He undressed before everyone, and you see that his arms and neck and chest to the navel were black with hair, matted, ugly. That was as far as he was exposed. No one doubted his whole body was just as hairy. Glum and queer-acting as he was, he interested Tupacs, who planned to adopt him. I will have him as a son. For an oddity, he declared. Perhaps in time he will learn our language, and then we shall know what he is thinking. But the fellow sneaked out at dawn one day, Rainbow chuckled, taking Tupac's best horse. Little Chief and the son of the other family had been out tending the horses, and Ohia had tagged along. They had come in some time during the conversation and were sitting quietly behind their fathers. Suddenly Ohia asked, Did they track him down and recover the horse? Rainbow replied, What do you think, son? Had he not been received as a guest? And that seemed to answer Ohia's question. Long after the meal, they sat talking. So long after that everyone was hungry again and glad of the lunch Bluebird warmed up and served by the light of the lamplit fire. Just when the conversation seemed to die down for the night, the uncle said between puffs on his pipe, To go back to your question, what are they like? Well, I would say that many of them seem very stern and hard. They are strangely dull towards those about them. They go along on their way without recognizing fellow humans as they pass. Very unmannerly they seem. Some of them, at least. Of course, I only see a few, and their looks, well, first of all, let me tell you about their eyes. Many have blue eyes, some have brown, some have yellow, and not a few have black eyes as black as ours. And their hair, if it is not yellow, it is brown or black or blazing red. Their skins are faded and pale. What of it you can see through the hair, that is. But here's an odd thing. If they stay in the hot sun all day, they do not turn dark brown as we do, but actually a bright crimson. Oh, unbelievable, crimson faces. Yes, and arms too. I once saw several of them swimming in the hot sun, stripped to the waist. They were hairy and red, all right. Waterlily was aghast, so much so that she forgot she had been taught never to break into conversation of her elders, especially of men. Her curiosity got the best of her, and she asked, Do their women have hair on their faces too? Do they get crimson in the sun? I think not, the uncle tried to recall. I think not. I never saw a woman with a red face, and I believe their faces are free of hair. But we do not see the women close because they stay inside the stockade most of the time. Bluebird had listened to the incredible story with very little comment till now. But when she gained the woman's ear, she said to her in a low tone, And their children, what about them? Her interest always leaned towards children. her own first and then others. "Ah, wife of my nephew, I was coming to that, and it will surprise and shock you." She spoke with an air of one about to tell something too fabulous to believe. "Listen, those people actually detest their children. You should see them, slapping their little ones' faces and lashing their poor little buttocks to make them cry. Why, almost any time of day, if you walk near the stockade, you can hear the soldiers' wives screaming at their children. Yes, they thoroughly scold them. I have never seen children treated so. Only if a woman is crazy might she turn on her own child, not knowing what she did." Bluebird was speechless for a time, but at last she sighed. "It is hard to imagine. Why do they do it?" "I suppose," the woman said, "when the children are naughty, that is the quaint way of training them to be good. By talking loudly and fast and by striking them. The people doubtless hope to scare them into good behavior. I know it sounds queer." "Truly," Bluebird said, "I can see but one effect myself. It should only make them act worse, frightened so they cannot think. But I suppose children are used to it, knowing no other way. Poor things." The woman went on from there in a happier vein, as she described the fragile beauty of the American soldiers' children. Their chiseled faces, their flower-like coloring, would make you believe the Maker of men fashioned each one by hand while studying carefully for the best effect. But Bluebird found little solace in that. After all, could one's physical beauty compensate for so horrible a lot? She hugged Smiling One close, feeling sick with sympathy for the unknown children. Such were the impressions Rainbow's party got from the things told them. Next day they traveled only a short while and then made camp for the night, even though their destination was all but in plain sight, and the day was young. Visitors should not straightway enter without first letting it be known that they were about to arrive. The uncle rode on ahead to announce them, and particularly to report Pawnee that he had brought Rainbow with him, and that the meeting of the two Kola was very near. At once Pawnee and his Tashbaye got ready to receive them. And meantime, at their camp, Bluebird unpacked the various articles she had brought for return gifts, knowing they would be feasted and given presents, and many women would be bringing courteous food to her teepee. Soon enough, for Pawnee had remained in readiness daily, he was seen coming out to welcome them and bring them in. He rode a black horse and led a handsome iron gray, and everyone knew that one was for Rainbow. But Rainbow was ready too. He had kept a sorry mare with blonde tail and mane, tied to a stake near his teepee, where she was grazing contentedly, unaware that very shortly she would be changing owners. In those days, the ordinary run of horses were called common horse, a term that referred to the small animals derived from wild herds of mustangs that roamed the plains. From tribe to tribe, they spread rapidly by trade or as gifts exchanged during times of truce, but more often by systematic horse stealing, which was a legitimate part of all intertribal warfare. Almost everyone had and did acquire some common horses. The so-called white man's horse or American horse was something else, and quite special. It was a larger animal, better in all respects, but principally in its looks and power to endure. The American horse was rare. Only very able men here and there managed to acquire them and own them with pride. Both Pawnee's iron gray and Rainbow's sorrel were American horses. Between men in fellowhood, nothing common would do. When Pawnee approached, Rainbow, who rode out to meet them, dismounted for their greeting. "How, Kola?" "Greetings, friend." As they spoke, they incidentally exchanged the ropes by which they had been leading their horses without saying anything about them, so that when they walked back to the camp, Rainbow was leading the iron gray and Pawnee the sorrel. For this, their first meeting since 10 years before, when they pledged abiding loyalty to each other. They thus quietly carried out the imperative of their code. "The best I have done is for my Kola." It was neatly done. "We will start at once for the camp circle," Pawnee said, after greeting his new sister-in-law and the others. At once he began to address Gloku as mother. Rainbow's children as daughters and sons, and Prairie Flower as niece, according to the system of relationships through which all social life was carried on. And when they arrived at Pawnee camp, the welcome accorded Rainbow's family was no different from that to a lifelong relative's returning home after a long absence. It was, in fact, a homecoming. The wives of the two brothers addressed each other as sisters, and all Pawnee's relatives also became appropriately related to Rainbow's family. Before long, they all were associating together, even the children, as close relatives in a warm, intimate atmosphere. The visitors could not feel strange where everything made them belong. They were feasted and honored in various ways, and as their acquaintance spread, it seemed as though they did nothing but go from one teepee to another, where they were bidden as guests. Amid all this social whirl, Pawnee invited his friend to stay long enough to enjoy the Sundance celebration in his company. "It is only a few days off," he said, "and the preparatory events are already underway. I should be sorry to have you leave now." He had a plan. When he said this, that did not show up until later. Thus, it happened that the visitors from White Ghost Camp Circle decided to remain. The decision was to have great significance for the young girl Waterlily. A new, wholly exciting, and at the same time baffling experience lay just ahead, which far more than the ritual of the buffalo ceremony was to change her from a child to a woman. Unaware of all this, Waterlily found it thrilling enough just to see the great crowds of visitors arriving from faraway places whose names she had never even heard before. They were all Dakotas, but they were not all Tetons. Some spoke familiar language in strange dialects that made her and her cousin giggle as they imitated them in private. For some were from the Yaktan-speaking people across the Royal Water, and a few were from the Santee-speaking people still further east. To one hearing their speech for the first time, it was startling to say the least. "Isn't it funny, cousin?" Prairie Flower asked. "I know what they are saying, and yet it sounds different." "Yes," Waterlily tried to explain it. "It is as though they are talking beyond a curtain. It comes out all right, but not too plainly." The young girl felt vicariously honored to see how popular her father Rainbow was. Many men had known him before, and now, since he had been recognized by the local Kit Fox members by his one-sided haircut, he was being included in their meetings and activities. Such honors. How glad Waterlily was that they had come. Each succeeding day was more interesting than the last. And now this, the Omahas were coming. They were coming to sing, whatever that might mean. As the crier rode by announcing it, Waterlily did not understand, but it sounded intriguing, especially because the entire camp circle buzzed with the news. "They have already arrived. Yonder you may see them putting up their camp. They are preparing to sing, and we all know how well they can sing. This is an event. You men who are men, you who can give away your best without your pulse quickening, get ready to give as becomes you. According to their custom, the visitors are coming to sit down Omaha style. Be prepared to meet them worthily." In such phrases, the announcer rallied the people. "It will be a great sight," Pawnee told his guests. "Up there in the north, your people have never seen anything like it. You will enjoy it. You must all go and look on." If the word Omaha and the term "to sit Omaha style" had any vague meaning to Bluebird, they certainly were completely strange to the girls. Among White Ghost people, the names of distant tribes in the south and east were only names, but to Rainbow, the erstwhile roamer, the Omahas were known. He had heard tell of their record in war and the Southern Tetons, and of their periodic meetings with them under truce, when they came with their families. Certainly they were welcome to the prayerful Sundance. Among the Dakotas, all the traditional enemies were received in friendship for the annual celebration, and the courtesy was reciprocated. There were no instances known of Dakotas being refused entry to the Sundance of another Plains tribe. The following morning was crisp and clear. The air was charged with expectancy, as the Omahas in the distance methodically arranged themselves for their approach. The more far-sighted of the Tetons announced their movements from time to time, and not always agreeing in what they saw. However, now they were ready. Now they are moving. No, not yet. They are still marshaling themselves. Yes, so they are. Now they are walking. Yes, they are walking. They are definitely on their way. During all this time, the Dakotas too had been arranging themselves. The men, who prided themselves on being able to give their best unflinchingly without their pulse quickening, were spanned out in a front rank, holding one and more gift horses by ropes, while the women and the children and such men and youths as had not yet attained top status in the tribe followed them in the great crowd. The Dakota group was comparable in size to the Omaha group, and at the instant when it was clear that the Omahas were marching, the Dakotas shouted the usual signal cry, Hokahe, and started together. Steadily and determinedly, the two people drew towards each other in ceremony, out on the open prairie. But they did not meet. When they were somewhat more than 100 paces apart, both sides came to an abrupt halt and stood arraying, facing each other. There was no denying it. The Omahas presented a magnificent picture. Waterlily and Prairie Flower whispered breathlessly that never had they seen anything like it before. Tall, stalwart, and self-assured in their gorgeous costume of costly white buckskin, heavily fringed and brilliantly ornamented, with war standard high and feather flying. Truly the Omahas were a breathtaking sight. And as they stood motionless there on the lush green grass, under an intensely blue sky, with only a few sharply white clouds floating against it, the fresh morning breeze caught their colorful standards and flirted them about gracefully. And as they stood without a word for a long moment before the Omaha men in front seated themselves on the ground in a long straight row facing the Dakotas, who continued to stand throughout the entire ceremony. In a solid background, the other Omahas remained standing behind their men. All the Omaha's faces were painted red, even the children's. Immediately then, their singers stepped out in the open, in front of the seated men, placed their drums on the ground and gathered about it, and began to sing in clear voices. Beating time with ornamented drumsticks, all the Omaha men took up the strain and swelled it, filling the air with indescribably sweet melody. The many and varied songs were extremely well sung. To many of them, the women added a decant, something quite apart and yet related to the melody, coming in unexpectedly, in shrill voices at a piercing high pitch. Song followed song to regale the Dakotas. Occasionally, in Omaha, no doubt, one of their best singers stood up to sing alone. Again, the women added their peculiar accompaniment, but more softly, so as not to drown out the solo voice. The Dakotas listened, entranced, and cheered each song at its close, whispering to one another as they applauded, "The Omahas have come to sing indeed." Especially to the visitors from the north, all this was gripping. There was so much here to tell back home on a winter's evening, when callers would surely come in to hear tales of the South. They must observe every bit of it. They must not let any detail escape. But the total effect, how could that ever be communicated adequately? For here was something one must see and feel oneself, all this color and sound and action on this exquisite, beautiful day. When the last song died away, it was the Dakotas' turn to act, nor did they hesitate. The ceremonial giveaway was fundamental to all Plains life. For the Dakotas, it was their particular pride and glory. And now, here it was, to be elevated to its sublime height. It was one concerted act, not from person to person as usual, but from tribe to tribe. The men who were men were ready to give their horses. Their wives standing behind them could hardly be seen for the great packs of other gifts that they proudly bore on their backs. The Dakotas were all rather shabbily dressed. They had, in fact, come just as they were, in commonplace daily garb, for that was the custom. The host must be plainly dressed, as so not to shame the guest by seeming competition. But the guest was free to be as elaborate as he could afford. It was expected of him. After the vigorous giveaway, when all the Dakotas' gifts were in the Omaha's hand and the Omaha singers and cheerers had lauded the givers to the skies, then some of the Omahas stepped out into the open and briefly danced the characteristic social dance for which they were known, the Omaha or the grass dance. Suddenly it was over. The visiting tribe turned about and betook themselves to their own camp yonder, while the Dakotas broke ranks and walked home in informal groups, on the way discussing and admiring the scene. And as they began to head for their scattered teepees, men shouted to one another, "Tomorrow will be our turn to sing. We will be wise to prepare at once. Tomorrow at this time we ourselves shall come out to sit Omaha style." And so they did. The entire event was repeated in reverse, the Omahas coming out as hosts and givers, and the Dakotas as guests to sing for them. This time it was the Omahas who were simply dressed, while the Dakotas wore their finery, which, if anything, was even more impressive than the Omahas, or so it was agreed by the two girls spectators. The taller Dakota men appeared even handsomer, their costumes more stunning, their stride more direct, their carriage more erect and regal. All the men forming the front rank had on their splendid eagle feather war bonnets, some round, the long plumes drooping gracefully about the shoulders, others with the long feather trailers that gently brushed and bent the grass behind the men as they walked along. For this was the Dakota's headdress, and it lent a certain majesty to its wearer. Prairie Flower was proud to say, "Every man is a chief." The Dakota singers took their position in front, and as they sang, their song after all proved an even match to the Omahas in beauty and intricacy and style. The visiting tribe was delighted with them, to judge by the cheers and spirited applause after each song. It was always a great treat to hear the songs of another tribe, for even though all plain singing might sound monotonously alike to an unaccustomed ear, the character of each tribe's songs and its style of delivery were distinctive enough for neighboring tribes to identify them and enjoy their novelty. Truly the Omahas had come not only to receive but to give, with the same liberality and readiness of the Dakotas the day before. They gave their gifts of many kinds and equally high quality. The result of this mass generosity back and forth was an increasing sense of friendship and camaraderie. Now, at last, the two tribes mingled freely, and the visitors were invited to move in and be one with the Dakotas. All enmity was forgotten as they prepared to pray together in the great sun dance. Any Omaha who has made a vow and cares to carry it out at this time is welcome to do so with us, the visitors were told. None was barred from this common prayer because of tribal differences. For a time it was all Waterlily and her cousin could do to dodge the crowds returning homeward, but at last they were in the clear. Waterlily was thoughtful and disturbed and wished for her enthusiastic young cousin would not go on and on talking about everything, for her own thoughts were on a certain member of this Dakota group of singers, who had drawn close to their immense drum and led the chorus. And well she might, for he was at once the youngest and the handsome of all the singers. His sweet voice continued to sing in her ear, and a moving picture of him in action unreeled endlessly before her eyes. And she did not see the people about her. Such ability in leading the singers, all older than himself, such personal charm, or so it seemed, by the way the others continually looked to him for direction, and at the same time laughed and joked with him. Was he born singing and leading? You would think so, by the fact he was completely at home in his role and unflustered by the hundreds of eyes on him in admiration. Who was he? What was his name? Where did he come from? The questions surged in Waterlily's brain, piling up on each other until she suddenly grew frightened, thinking she had actually asked them aloud. But Prairie Flower was quite unaware of her and her own excitement. Here was the first man Waterlily had noticed. Since her turning point in the buffalo ceremony, she had been eligible to be courted. But until she had saw this altogether attractive youth, she had taken no notice of men. She had deliberately stayed away from the courting hour, too diffident to go with the other young women when they went out near sunset for food or water, knowing that the young men of the camp, wrapped in their blankets, waited in hiding to catch them alone and declare their intentions. From the instant he caught her eye, she had found it a struggle to keep from looking at him, and if in glancing about casually she happened to look in her direction, she had quickly looked elsewhere, frowning as though puzzling out something yonder that was not there at all. She was sure her finesse had been perfect. He could not have supposed on her account that he attracted her, that she, a total stranger, was boldly making up to him. No, that would never do. It was contrary to all the rules of maidenly behavior, rules that had never been any effort to keep. Perhaps tomorrow she might meet him again. If so, she would be in every way circumvent. Her cousin, Prairie Flower, who was always with her, must not suspect anything. Nobody must. She was almost glad to be on her way home to safety, but then her cousin, still a child since she had not had a buffalo ceremony, shocked her by a too candid question. "Cousin, you know that the youngest singer, the one who kept looking at you, Waterlily's interruption was casual sounding. "I'm sure I have no idea what singer you mean." But the question excited her all over again. To think that he too had been unable to keep from looking, and that Prairie Flower had noticed it. They reached their teepee hot and tired from all they had seen. Waterlily wanted to get where she could think, where no one would upset her, and she felt impatient to find Smiling One digging right in front of the doorway, while a small relative stood by with her first tooth in her hand, waiting to bury it. "Get out of the way," Waterlily said sharply. "Not where people must walk. Bury it to one side of the entrance." "Do you want our cousin to sicken and die from people's walking over her tooth?" She said die callously. To her, dying was still no more than a word. One so young and so alive could mouth it without apprehension. Bluebird came in just then, eager to hear all about the sing, for she had offered to stay home with all the children of the relatives, that the parents might have an opportunity to attend. "Daughter," she asked with unusual interest, "was it wonderful again? Did our tribesmen look and sing as well as the Omahas yesterday?" "I hope so." Neither had caught the other's mood. Waterlily was indifferent to the question, unable to see how much it meant to Bluebird. Bluebird failed to notice that there was a change in Waterlily, that something was preoccupying her. Never had she been offhanded to a question from her mother before. The girl answered absent-mindedly, "Oh yes, I guess so." And then, seeing her mother expecting more detail, she added, "It was about the same. It was all, well, fair." Already the Omaha sitting to which she had looked forward with high excitement was commonplace, in the light of what might happen tomorrow.